Hi, welcome to the MAPS webinar series, Healing Tomorrow's Future. We are thrilled to be bringing you this series packed with valuable information and education within our community. My name is Honey Renisella, and I'm the Executive Director of MAPS, the Medical Academy of Pediatrics and Special Needs. Within these webinars, we're able to empower clinicians on the knowledge and tools to support patients facing a variety of health challenges. For more information on MAPS or to register for a conference, please visit us at www.medmaps.org. That's www.medmaps.org. Thanks for joining us on this journey towards a brighter, healthier future. Hello, this is Honey Renisella. I am the Executive Director of MAPS, the Medical Academy of Pediatrics and Special Needs, and I am so excited that today I will be talking to the Dr. William Parker, who has played a critical role in some of the development that was released yesterday when the new administration had shared with us that Tylenol and acetaminophen could potentially be involved within autism. So, Dr. Parker, would you be so kind as to tell our audience just a little bit about who you are and maybe how you got involved in this?
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, honey. So I am a professional scientist. I've started doing research back in the 1980s. A while back, I worked at Duke University for almost 30 years, retired from there. I'm currently working at the University of North Carolina as a visiting scholar, and I run a private nonprofit company that works with research and education. And we're really focused mainly right now on, there's some other things that we do, but mainly on the connection between acetaminophen and autism spectrum disorder. We've been working on that first at Duke and now at North Carolina and the private nonprofit for about a decade.
That is so powerful. That's crazy because, yesterday when it was mentioned, it seemed like it was new, right? So it seemed like it was the first time so many people had heard about this. And I know you're one of our MAPS doctors and that this has been your passion. Could you tell us just really quickly? So, you're one of the scientists that first raised the alarms, right, on why this is critical. So can you just summarize why this is such a big issue and why it's important for those of us? I'm a parent. I have 25-year-old twins with autism. Why is this such an important piece of the autism puzzle?
Yeah, so the way that we understand it right now, and I was the first academic to
Mm.
really start raising the alarm, but there was others, and if you look back in history, about 2009, and hindsight is always 2020, right? But in 2009, there was enough evidence there to say this looks very, very suspicious. Maybe even add a couple of more varies on that. So it's been around for a long time, and it's something that we really got to pay attention to. When you ask, well, what's the big picture? It's actually fairly simple, and there's something called Occam's razor in science. If you see a simple explanation that explains all of the observations, that's a really good one. That's a good explanation. And the really simple explanation is that there's something called susceptibility. And we know this with other drugs. Codeine is a great example, right? After almost 200 years, we had to stop using it in children because some of the children were susceptible. So acetaminophen is the same thing. Some children and babies, especially neonates and probably during pregnancy, but especially right at the time of birth, some children are super susceptible. We even know the reasons why. And that susceptibility is a complex mixture of genetics, environment, and even something called epigenetics. This huge complex picture, which every scientist who works on autism, they know about that. But what they don't know is that complex mix of stuff interacts with acetaminophen to induce autism spectrum disorder. And you see regressive autism looking the same as infantile autism. We look at the laboratory animal studies, and we know that acetaminophen has a broad window of time in which it can induce an autism spectrum disorder. In that sense, it's almost the same as alcohol and fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. I mean, there's two peas in a pod. In fact, the drugs are metabolized by the exact same enzyme in the baby's body. So, it's a really straightforward explanation, and you can get that out of a lot of evidence that we've compiled and others have compiled going back all the way to 2008.
That is amazing. That is a crazy. I've never heard that link or that analogy of somebody, comparing it to that, but that's a pretty powerful statement. So let me just ask you this. So if you have clearly this is your it's become like your baby, if you will, if that's okay, I can call it your baby.
It's one of my babies. Yes, that is
Yes,
correct.
right. So again, I've said I've been a fan of yours for many, many years. And so if you were, right, you did just dig into, right, the pregnant moms. So let's just touch base on that really quickly. If you could stand in every OB's office, right, what would you tell them about maybe even just Tylenol and pregnancy?
Well, the first thing I would say is watch out for labor and delivery because as soon as you clamp that umbilical cord, the baby is on its own. And the babies we've known, I say we, people have known since the 1960s that newborn babies can't deal with drugs very well. And this is a classic case. In fact, most pediatricians and obstetricians don't know, but every veterinarian knows you can't give a cat, domestic cat, acetaminophen. You can't do it because it's dangerous for them. And the reason why is they're missing a certain enzyme pathway called glucuronidation. Well, it turns out newborn babies are missing the exact same pathway.
Wow. Wow. I had
Yeah.
never heard that.
Yeah,
So
that's just
this is
one. I
something
said
that,
there's 30 lines of evidence. That's just one of them.
right, right. So this is something that's actually known in the veterinarian world?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Wow. Well, I guess we have a lot to learn then. Wow, that's crazy. So that's interesting. I was actually speaking to one of our MAPS doctors yesterday, and she had shared with me, she's a professor at Harvard, and she had shared with me that most people don't even know that when a parent has Pitocin, a lot of times they just give they put Tylenol in the IV to help reduce the side effects. And I was actually sitting here with my partner, Kathy, and I was like, we looked at each other going, did we get that? Like, we didn't even know. But she was saying that most people don't even know that it's actually in there. Had you ever heard of that?
Yeah. So I mean, same is true of circumcision. So in the big study that is it's so huge it came out of Hopkins just showed that if you just measure the amount of acetaminophen that's in the cord blood, acetaminophen metabolites at the
Mhm.
time of birth, so it's in the umbilical cord, so you're just going to throw the blood away anyway. You measure that, and it predicts incredibly well whether or not a woman is going to have a child with autism. It's amazing. And of course, we know regressive autism is something separate. That's the acetaminophen
Right,
exposure later, and
right.
based on a 2008 study. So, it's just really super dangerous. And a lot of women are absolutely sure their kid never got it, but if they were circumcised, if they gave birth in a modern hospital, then you really often don't know.
Right. I think that I was kind of shocked, right? Because so many of us, I think so many of us are so protective and we are knowledgeable, right? So we have, my kids are 25. So I've shared this with my family members and my close friends, and I warn them all, and I'm like, be really careful. And, I'm pretty big about like, don't do Hep B at birth, like, hold off, protect the baby. I'm really big on um, breastfeeding, and I actually am not very big on circumcision. That's my personal decision. I didn't circumcise my boys 25 years ago, but like, this was something I've never even heard of that. I never even thought that could have been played into the role of, all these people think that their children didn't get any exposure to it, but the reality of what I learned yesterday that they truly might have,
Yeah,
and
'cause it's
we as
assumed to be
parents
so
just don't know.
Yeah, it's assumed to be so safe, and most pediatricians don't even know that circumcision is associated with a twofold increase in infantile autism. That was a study that came out in 2015. So, it's just, and the reason they did that study is because somebody, her name is Ann Bauer, she said, hey,
Mhm.
we're exposing a lot of kids to acetaminophen during circumcision. Somebody should check this. And when they did, boom, it lit up statistically like a Christmas tree. So
Oh my
you
God.
gotta, it's just, you can't induce autism in 3% of the population and not leave a huge trail of evidence. And that's what we find when we look, is there's a huge trail of evidence which people just aren't aware of. I'll give you another one. So
Okay.
and most pediatricians don't know this, but in adults, did you know that acetaminophen blunts social awareness?
Really?
No kidding. You can't make this up. So no, the people doing these studies,
Really?
just do a Google search for um, acetaminophen social analgesic, and it's there. These are good, solid studies. It's somehow acetaminophen in adults is known to affect social awareness, so it's doing something to the parts of the brain And of course, it was, as you know, as we've proven, published a paper in 2022. It was never tested for neurodevelopment. It was just assumed to be safe because it doesn't damage the liver, which is, and that's just making the assumption that babies are just small adults, which they're not. They metabolize the drug much differently.
Oh yeah. They're so delicate. They're so delicate. That I
Well,
do know, that I have always been very cautious. I feel very protective, right? I feel like I wanted to be the kangaroo with the baby in my pouch and protect it from the world, for the first year.
well,
So,
they're delicate in some ways, but their livers are sort of bulletproof. I mean, not totally bulletproof, but I mean, their livers are tough compared to that of an adult, but their brains are not.
mm, yeah. So yeah, I do remember at one point somebody telling me that the first 3 years of their life were the most critical for that brain development. Would you agree with that or?
Yeah, I mean, the average time to regression is 18 months, and it really, the amount of regressive autism falls off. You can find a case or two at age 5 and then nothing at age 6. So there's some very, very rare inductions in adolescents and adults that involve a catatonic state, but super rare, vanishingly rare. But so it's pretty much done by the age of 3 is a good cutoff, but you occasionally will see regression at age 4 or 5.
Wow, that I would have to assume that would be a big insult that would trigger that in I mean, I can't imagine somebody at 5 having that type of a regression because our regression occurred at 18 months. So it was really fast and furious. And I was like, oh my gosh, how do I fix this? Because I know they were okay and now they're not. And I know that they were one at one point. So I know I'm going to get back there. So that was like became my life's mission for the last 23 years. So on that note, for like a parent, so if they're desperate for clarity, right? So what's one myth that drives you the most nuts about when like a parent says, well, I never took it. Well, to your point, you might have actually taken it, not known it. But then also, oh, it's safe. It's been around forever. I did see somebody mentioned on social media that they actually quoted Tylenol, which was developed later. So they were like, well, autism was around way before Tylenol ever came out. But what is the one thing that you wish parents really understood, like that could really make a difference? Because I told you prior to us starting this interview that when my kids were 2 and they were diagnosed, and I saw our first ever Dan doctor, first thing he said was, make sure you don't ever give him Tylenol. And I was like, okay, 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 why? And he was like, to replace the liver of glutathione. And he went on and on and on. And I was like, who knew? Like, who, right? We think it's the safest drug to give pregnant moms and children. And so, what's the one myth you wished every parent knew, like a parent to potentially save their child?
Okay, so I'm thinking, and the history myth is a really good one because acetaminophen goes back to 1886. So, but I don't that's not the one. I wouldn't pick that one. Instead, I would probably say the myth that during pregnancy is the most dangerous time. So, and that is certainly true for some drugs, alcohol, for example, definitely true. But acetaminophen, no, it's what we call the peripartum period. That is so, and then the sensitivity drops off to about the age of 5, the susceptibility, I should say, and then probably pregnancy is really important. And there's a lot of things we don't know, like is it okay to treat an occasional fever? We don't know, but we know that chronic use of acetaminophen for pain control during pregnancy is probably really risky. So that would be the one myth that, and I've seen many doctors make that assumption because some drugs work that way, right?
Mm.
It's pregnancy is the worst, is the most sensitive time, but acetaminophen does not work that way, and all of the evidence is telling us that it's just not. It's a myth.
So let me ask you this. So why, or do you have any idea of why you think that like the mainstream medical community, and I always say that, part of the reason I did parent support for 20 years and then I jumped into MAPS to try in an effort to share this type of wisdom, right, with more and more physicians and pediatricians and nurse practitioners and anybody in the health field, right? Every physician and doctor should know this, but they don't. So why do you think that they're so hesitant or they're resistant or they're flat out saying, I mean, I saw in the news yesterday after the press conference, I was so shocked to see so many people coming out and saying, there's no proof to that. It's been safe. It's been proven safe. So what is the resistance? Like, what is the hesitancy? What do you think?
So, well, we actually study that question, and we have studied that question systematically in the scientific way. And there's three basic reasons that we can ascertain, and one of them is that when you initially think something is safe for the wrong reasons, and we've talked about that,
Mhm.
they just assumed a baby was a small adult, then the thinking becomes entrenched, right? And then, if you've administered something 1,000 times, you're emotionally compromised if
Mm.
suddenly, it comes out that this is bad. And then we're just human, right? So it's not evil, it's just being human that you get emotionally compromised, and it's hard to accept something new, and that's always been true of humankind. So that's one. A second
Mhm.
one we've talked a little bit about. It's a focus on pregnancy
Mhm.
when that's not really the biggest risk,
Mm.
right? It's not. It's the peripartum period is number one. Probably half the cases of autism, close to half, maybe 40 to 55% are induced just right around the time of birth before you go home from the hospital. It's amazing.
Wow.
So that's second, second mistake is focusing on pregnancy when it's not the major risk. And the third one is this statistical error that I mentioned before we started recording, is that some of these statistical analyses, they're doing what statisticians would call treating interacting variables as confounding factors. Now, what that means is you're essentially saying that it's safe for children to play with matches as long as there's no wood around, or no flammable curtains, or no flammable sheets, or anything. So, and this is the whole issue we go back to of, you can't, acetaminophen does not cause autism. That is absolutely false. It cannot cause autism. You also have to have susceptibility, which is this complex mixture of genetics, epigenetics, and environment. So those two things come together, and the way they run the statistics, it's just been a huge mistake. They didn't. The statisticians should have talked to the pharmacokineticist, and then everything would have been sorted out. It just never happened since 2013.
Oh my gosh, that's so sad. It's so sad. So historically, they've kind of been blindsided. And I have to tell you, I've coined this term, and I know it's probably offensive to so many physicians, but I call it like an innocent ignorance, right? They're so adamant that there could be zero relation, and it's just because they haven't seen the evidence. I mean, you clearly have been collecting evidence for years, since 2009, right?
Well, so in 2009, it was pretty evident, but it wasn't my field, right? So as
Mm.
a scientist, I didn't have my, 10,000 hours in to be knowledgeable and 20,000 hours in to be an expert. I didn't have that. So that
Mm.
takes a long time to build up. We first mentioned it in a paper in 2015. So this did not happen for me overnight. And then our first paper really focused on this topic, and a good paper, well cited, is 2017. So, if you're coming from outside from a different field, and I'm from the field of chronic inflammation and gut immune function,
Right.
which I still do. We still have a lot of work going on with that, but it takes a while to switch over.
Mm.
We have switched over. I mean, I have my 20,000 hours plus in on this, so I'm extremely knowledgeable, and I have a publication record that says I'm an expert. So we're moving forward now, and we'll get this.
Mm. Mm. Yeah, I've been following you for many, many years, and over a decade. I think I have a picture of us from like 2000 and like 12 or
Right,
something.
I had a lot more hair back then.
Well, mine wasn't gray back then, and I could see better.
Your hair is beautiful. You're good.
Yes.
Yeah, you're
So
fine.
it's so funny because I know that it's so what kind of shifted that, right? So what piqued your interest to bring you to this? Because it's such a, I mean, I love your work for years and years and years on the gut microbiome, and that's where I really kind of knew you in that area of expertise. And then when I found out you were kind of like shifting over, so this was fascinating. I know that even prior to this announcement, you and I were just discussing that, our board was like, we need to have, Dr. Parker speak on this topic in the spring because our plenary will be on toxins. So we're aware of all of your research, but what made you make the jump? Was it just somebody brought it to your attention? Was it just something that you were like, wow, this needs to be studied? So how did you like dive into this?
Okay, so this was say 2007. I was fairly renowned in the field of gut immunology,
Oh yeah.
and some folks from one of the it's a parent organization, somebody just like you contacted me and said, "Hey, you know a lot about the gut, and these kids with autism have problems with the gut. So, hey, why don't you? And I was definitely very, very knowledgeable about the gut and still am. And they needed help with that. So I started work, but I also worked on chronic inflammatory disease, which autism sort of is, but it's
Mhm.
sort of not. And there's some weird things about, I can tell you all about autoimmunity, allergy, neuropsychiatric stuff that includes postpartum depression and major depressive disorder and anxiety disorders. But there's autism is different, right? And
Mhm.
so that piqued my interest. And then when there was a 2008 study that came out, it's like, whoa, okay. Then as a scientist who studies the field in general, I could see that this accounts for what's different about autism. 100%, 100% accounts for it.
Mm.
And so then it was a matter of, well, nobody's working on this, nobody's publishing anything on this. Everybody's just sort of, so, I'm going to the conferences, and I was a professor at Duke at that time, so I had a pulpit to work from,
Mhm.
and I did not, yeah, it was just a matter of a slow progression, and it's in hindsight it seems so slow, but we did so much. I mean, it's getting into a new field as a scientist. You don't have graduate school training, you don't have a postdoc. You've got so much to learn and so much to catch up on, and you collaborate with I collaborate with pharmacologists and neuroscientists and toxicologists and
Mhm.
just statisticians, a lot of people that we have a great team with over a century of combined experience in science, and that's sort of what it takes. Like I said, some of the biggest mistakes were made because the toxicologist never was involved. And you got to get these people who are
Wow.
trained in drug toxicity in on the project, and just nobody was.
So it seems like you almost jumped into the field because nobody else was doing it.
Yeah.
Bit, right? It
Yeah, that
it
was a good way to say real succinctly what I just said. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. It nobody was studying it. Somebody brought it up to, and you were like, we should probably look at that. And I'll look at that.
Well, so, honey, it wasn't that nobody was studying it because there was, I mean, 15 different laboratories. Oh no, there's 15 different studies, probably at least a dozen different labs have published studies in laboratory animal models, but they'll just publish their study in their laboratory animal model without looking at the bigger picture.
Mm,
That
mm.
that somebody has to put it together and get in trouble for it.
No, so okay, so that is amazing. So I'm super excited that you're going to be speaking for us in March so that you can elaborate in more detail and educate all of these healthcare practitioners and these physicians and these researchers and scientists. So if there was one closing remark that you would want to tell people, obviously we know that this has been known. You kind of brought it to a bigger platform, right? To help it be known on a little bit, you know, louder using a megaphone, I feel like at this point. I was just so happy to hear it. I was shocked that most people didn't know it because again, this is something that I feel like I had been aware of for like 23 years and I'm literally just a mom, right? And so I feel like for 23 years I've known of this, but you're going to be coming and speaking in March. And what right now, like if you could say one closing thing, do you just want people to know after this announcement, what is the one thing that you want people to take away? I mean, if they're not going to be at our conference, I mean, hopefully all the physicians will be, but what do you want people to know about this recent, you know, this
Yeah,
new
and this
release?
this might sound crazy. Maybe it won't sound crazy to you, but one of the things that we're seeing is that we want people to know we are not blaming the parents or the physicians for doing what they were told is best. We're
Mm.
absolutely not doing
I think that is critical. It's so funny because that was something I am in a lot of parent groups, right? For special needs adults. And a lot of people are like, great, they're blaming the parents again. And I'm like, I have never felt blame ever. It was the doctor's responsibility, in my opinion, but the doctors just didn't know, right? So I feel like that's kind of why MAPS exists because people like you do the research, we bring it to the physicians and we say, oh, hey, did you know this? And then they're like, wow, mind blown. No, I did not, but now I do, right? So when you know better, you do better, right? So
that.
that's a
Right. So, but
great,
but some people, I think, maybe for reasons which aren't entirely all good, or saying, oh, you're blaming the parents. And
Mm.
that is definitely, I mean, it's science. It's telling us how to prevent injury. We will pursue it. So that's the bottom line.
Yeah. Well, I think that, as a parent's perspective, every well visit I went to, they would tell me to take Tylenol. My doctor would tell me to take Tylenol pre and post. Like they were like, take it when, you're getting ready to come a few hours before so they don't have a reaction to their inoculations, and, you know, take it afterwards to help reduce any risk. And, I think, I would never, my friends and I have never felt guilt from that. I mean, we're like, we just trusted that they knew that what they were doing. So I'm super excited that this came out. I feel like what's going to actually change the trajectory and help kids be healthier is knowledge, right? Knowledge is the power that we need to do better. When we know better, then we do better, right? So therein lies, right, what you were saying, like the genetic component or the epigenetics. Like George Burns could smoke, and people are like, well, it's not that bad. George Burns smoked until he was, you know, I don't even know, until his 90s, and he didn't have any issues. But then people get cancer at their 30s. So there is something that there is a subset of a population that are susceptible, right? Hopefully there will be more identifiable markers. There's a lot coming out with the genomics. I know we just had a big conference on this, and hopefully my dream has always been to identify the medical, procedures, and even the inoculations and the drugs prior to giving them to a child. So I hope that's where the future of medicine goes, and I hope with this powerful research that it will help guide. This is just you think this is, you said it doesn't cause autism, but it's definitely a big piece, correct?
Well, the way that the evidence is, let's just say we are certain that if you took away the acetaminophen, you would take away many, if not most cases, and most likely the vast majority of cases of autism. So autism by itself doesn't do anything, but it's a necessary ingredient for many, if not most cases, and probably the vast majority of cases of autism. So it's again, you got to have that susceptibility.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah,
Mm-hmm.
and
That's
I would say that when people first hear this, that a world's most popular drug that is known to be safe is causing 3% of the kids to have neurodevelopmental problems classified as autism spectrum disorder. Say they think that is crazy, but then once they hear all the evidence, then they flip around. They think what's crazy is that we let this happen. So
mm-hmm.
it's all from your perspective. In 1,000 years, they're going to look back. Uh, Back in those days, they had this drug that it damaged, a very significant percent of the male population, and after about 40 years, they just stopped using it. So, and that's going to be just one of those footnotes in history. It'll just be a bizarre kind of footnote.
Wow. Wow, that is so powerful. I just praise God that you are involved in all of this and that you're bringing it to light. So, how can some of our physicians that might be listening to this find out more on your research? You have a website. How can they look into this prior to our conference? They all have to come see you at our conference so they can pick your brain there in person and hear your expertise on the stage. But what websites would you suggest?
We have a website where we've got a lot of things to compile, things that are coming up, and the evidence that we know about. It's called preventautism.org.
Preventautism.org. I love that. I love that. Well, thank you so much. This has been absolutely amazing. I love you taking the time. I know you're incredibly busy and you're probably getting lots of calls. So I feel very fortunate that you took a little time out to share some insight with me. But Dr. Parker, thank you so much. I cannot tell you how grateful our community is to have you involved. And we will see you at MAPS we're going to be in Charlotte. So we're coming to the Carolinas. We're super excited. It's going to be March 12th to the 14th. So we're looking forward to having you there. And we love that you're part of our community. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you very, very much, honey. It's my pleasure.
Thanks so much for joining us today. I'm Honey Renisella, and this is MAPS. As we heal tomorrow's future, we appreciate you joining us on the journey. We'll see you next time.